I kind of, when you said Romans, I was like, oh, he said mine. But it's okay, we can both have the same.
You can. And so every Friday night I was running their house. I don't know how they survived, but that's where I was.
2 or 3 guys I can think of straight off the top of my head who were so helpful to me in that regard.
Jonathan. Yeah. Somebody had to.
So that's good. So yeah. Hello, welcome back. We have just recorded the previous video. We're heading into the second one, but for you, this is the second week in this series as we look to see how guys within the church, how we can learn how to be better leaders, how we can understand how to encourage other brothers as well. It might not be necessarily all that valuable if there are ladies watching to you, but that doesn't mean that you can't necessarily sort of draw information, maybe share with others if you feel led to do so. If you did miss our previous video, I will link it around. If it's not in the description, it'll be up here somewhere. Hopefully I'm on the right side of the screen. But that was just looking at specifically why there's maybe less numbers of men in the church and sort of biblical characters that we've related to, and why it's so important to be able to draw from the word. We did have the Sunday school answers in there as well. We always know that we need to draw from Jesus.
That was Jonathan. Yeah. Somebody had to.
So that's good. So yeah, Ian and Jonathan, do you want to just give us a quick rundown of your background again?
Yeah, well, just pastor of a local church, and delighted to be here. Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah, Jonathan, I am a photographer by trade. And very much a part of the local church, doing worship leading, men's ministry with Nigel, nice. As well as on the PCC as well. So yeah.
That's great. And Nigel, about yourself as well.
I'm Nigel, and I'm work with Zach in Precept. Yeah.
Perfect. I feel like this question that we're going to go into straight away, as we sort of touched on in the intro, is that we all have kind of different contexts and backgrounds. And ways in which we glorify the Lord through our talents and skills, whether it be photography, pastoring. Nigel's unbelievably good at tennis as well.
That's past tense now, though, isn't it?
I mean, apparently he tells me every week he's beating teams. So
it's all relative.
Okay, so the question that we're going to run into is a tricky one. Yeah, it's not meant for any sort of judgment or that it's problems that are causing mass division. It's just a case of saying, okay, how can we make this better? And we've already touched on the fact that it can be particularly hard with guys anyways to break through certain areas. And so this next question is, do you think there is a real communication / leadership breakdown between sort of different generations of men? And what ways would you recommend sort of healing or developing those divides? So it's quite a wordy question, but we had a little breakdown maybe of the question before we started the video. So Jonathan, start with you. You had some great points. Do you want to kick us off?
It's interesting because I suppose, you can see sometimes in church that you will get the young 20s to 30s, the hip guys who will generally be in their little clique, because they're the ones that are doing life together and they're kind of all in each other's houses, eating meals, things like that, which is absolutely great, don't get me wrong. But you then find that there's the older guys who are just kind of off, doing their thing, and then of course there's the younger lads, teenagers, even younger perhaps, doing their thing. And it almost seems to get put into boxes of, there's the children's work, there's the youth, there's the young adults, and there's the adults. And one thing that I have found that has been really helpful for me is that I have had good, godly, older men be a part of my life since I properly became a Christian when I was 18 years old. And it started with a guy called Howard, a South African guy, who just literally invited me over to his house once a week for breakfast with his family and just to do a bit of Bible study and have a chat. And I never realized just how important that was to me. And I found that God has always put older men into my life to help encourage, but also to really challenge. And actually that's really, really hard sometimes, because they will see things in my life and say, Jonathan, this isn't right. You need to get it sorted. But actually I found that I've needed those things. And without them, if I'd have just stuck with my friends, they would never have challenged me in that way. They would have just I like the term fed my monkey, you know, tell me, oh, you're doing all right. But actually we need to have people who are challenging us. And then when we get to a place of maturity, it's then our turn. I find now, I am now stepping into the role of being a leader and drawing the young guys along. So I help to lead a home group, but also it can simply be just, you know, going out for a walk with a young guy and just chatting life through. And I know that can sometimes almost seem a little bit daunting, because sometimes the young people of today have got an entirely different mindset on things. But I would challenge you to be open-minded to what they have to say, because sometimes they will surprise you in the things that they come up with. But then you can gently challenge them. And I find that you need to build that relationship before you can then start to challenge. But if we stick to our little bits of groupings, I think we're going to lose out on so much of the wealth and wisdom, and from the youth as well, because even they have some fantastic wisdom that we don't even always think about. I will just say that there was one guy who was a real father figure to me, who walked with me for a period of time and was just such a key guy. And then I met my wife, and obviously then kind of spent more time with her. And I wasn't around for him in the last few bits of his life. And it gets me now, even just thinking of this. You know, he passed away, and I realised, and it really got me, that I wasn't there to help and support him. Sometimes we think that the older guys are there just to support us, but actually no, we're there to support them as well, to encourage them, to help them, to serve them. And I wasn't there for him. And it made me realise at that point, I need to consider the older men in my life. Firstly, to thank them and acknowledge them for the things that they've done in my life and the input that they have given me. But also to serve them, to encourage them, has been a real challenge.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think like what you're saying as well, within biblical examples, we see Samuel as well being someone that's just this headship to Saul, to say, like, call him out on the things that don't necessarily always sit that well. I mean, we see this sort of time and time again within the Bible, just these types and shadows of this father figure, whether it be the actual father or whether it be someone in their life that provides that role. Nigel, you're a sporty guy. We touched on the tennis. Do you think that there's I often find that there's maybe things like sporting events or just guys hanging out as a means to try and find similarities and something that maybe if we don't have a contextually kind of similar background, we can at least have something to have in common. I know you do the breakfast as well. Sorry, I don't want to take away. You got ideas and things.
No, I think sport is a great one. Yes, obviously the older you get, the less of the more active sports you're able to do. Hence tennis, because you can go on doing that for a long time. So yes, I think sport is a good one to break down the divides. Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, I'm just thinking, after church, you look around church and you see who's talking with who, and you generally see guys of a similar age talking to guys of a similar age, and so on and so on. So yes. But I like what Jonathan said about having a mentor. I think that's important. I think that was something that maybe you said that Howard invited you, so you weren't necessarily seeking him. But I think if people are serious about their Christian faith, I think to seek out an older person, a wiser person that's kicked around a bit would be sensible. In my own life, I had that 2 or 3 guys I can think of straight off the top of my head who were so helpful to me in that regard. But then as you get older, you want to give something back, and you want to be able to help others because you've got some life experience. I think I'm delighted to have these guys alongside me here, co-lead a men's group that we have. that we do once a month for 6 months of the year. And I think that's been a bridge for some guys to come in and get to know other people from different churches. I think, although it's difficult, I think guys, it's not easy. You know, you can invite lots of people but I think God has taught me over the years that it's not about numbers, it's about the strength of the heart and the passion of the person.
It's funny that, if I may, just in that sometimes you only play a small part in someone's life, and you think, well, you don't really think you did much, and then years down the line, you get an email or a letter saying you made a big difference in my life. Is wonderful. So it's nice to know that.
Yeah, I think, you know, God calls us to faithfulness and obedience. So, you know, what is God calling us to as guys? And we're to be faithful to that and to offer that, to be obedient to that and leave the rest up to God. But so I think it's a great question, and I think we need to be more aware of, you know, I'm a slightly older guy, of the younger guys, and maybe reach out to them and offer what support I can, perhaps.
And we even done a video as well on how to put together a men's group. It's a 2-parter like this one, and I'll link that again in the description or up here, and you can check that out if that's something that you're interested in doing. Just starting a men's Bible study group, it'd just be a great way. And I think a lot of the time as well, just being around the Word, having that side of knowing that you're kind of like sharpening as brothers, like around the Word, and just it's not kind of like a match up of who's this and who's that. It's like you can bring something really important. Again, it's where that contextually kind of plays out, is that like a younger person might necessarily feel a certain part of the passage speaks to them more than somebody with other wisdom, but then in their generation or season that they're going through, that they can have something specifically that is able, again, to minister. And so I think that that's what makes the Bible study is such a great tool to be able to bond over, is because everyone always has something, whether it's seasonal that they're going through, whether it's to do with their age and the way that they're affected by culture, they have a lot to offer. Ian, what do you think?
Well, there's been lots of stuff just kicked off just because of in my thoughts, because of the conversation that we've had. I too can point to somebody who mentored me when I first became a Christian as a young man and started attending a local church where I was growing, and there was a person there. He wasn't that much older than me. He was 10, 12 years older than me, but he was married, had a child, so I was in my very early 20s, and he was just that next generation ahead of me. But I worked in the motor trade, and he worked in the same industry, so we had that connection with one another straight away. And as a couple, actually, they took me under their wing. And so every Friday night I was running their house. I don't know how they survived, but you know, that's where I was. And the church I was in that point, there weren't any other young people. There was initially, there was after that, but not initially, not my age. So that was crucial for me to have someone that I could identify with, someone who would watch out for me, someone who would, you know, he did discipleship stuff with me. We went through things, and you know, there's a couple of remained close friends ever since. They're still close friends and still there. I don't live near them anymore, so there's not the same physical connection, closeness in that way, but you know, we're still close. So that's and I don't think it's a coincidence that that's happened for me, and you said that's happened for you, and because I think God does that. And I'm reminded of 1 John 1 where he talks about spiritual children, spiritual young men, and spiritual fathers, and there's a reason why God's using that language and that picture, is because it's a whole picture of mentorship, isn't it? That actually lots of old people might think I've nothing to give. Well, actually, if you've grown up and matured in the faith, you've got so much to give. And it might be is a bit like you're saying, well, maybe young people think that older people have nothing to give, and maybe it just needs to be one generation ahead. It might not always have to be someone who's retired or someone who's, but it can be. And I think it's just having that heart. There's a goal for all of us to mature in our faith so that we can be spiritual mothers and fathers to be for the next generation and to train, because we're not just meant to grow up for ourselves, we're meant to help others, aren't we? And so really what we're talking about is discipleship, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I know that's something that as a church we're looking at the moment, and the big question is, well, what's God saying to you? The first thing is about hearing, training ourselves to hear God's voice, and then secondly, very simple, what are you going to do about it? You know, how are we going to put it into action? And so throughout church, for me, my background as a pastor, you know, we can do lots of Bible studies, but people don't grow up necessarily from doing Bible studies. It's about applying what we've learned through the Bible study. And Bible study is important that we learn and know God's word, but we need to also put it into action.
It's interesting. Yesterday,
and we need help to do that. We can't do that on our own.
No, it's interesting. Yesterday we were on a call with some other Precept directors, and we were looking at a passage from 2 Peter chapter 1 and looking at the difference in the word. There were two Greek words for knowledge in those first sort of 11 verses. One was gnosis, one was epignosis. And knowledge is just knowledge, but epignosis is basically putting that knowledge into practice. It's applying that knowledge. What's the impact of knowing this? Well, I live my life this way. It has an impact on my walk. So we're not just after gnosis, we're after epignosis, which is the impact of that knowledge, which is what you're talking about there.
And it's interesting in that as leaders or people who are older who are bringing the young people up, you can always just teach what you know, but in all honesty, I don't think that is really going to change anyone's life. And like you're saying, it's almost like you are imparting part of yourself onto that next generation. And I know certainly for me, I caught the heart of those older men rather than actually, I can't even remember half the stuff they told me, but it was catching the heart and putting that into practice.
Seeing their example.
Exactly, the example. And I think sometimes we kind of get stuck in thinking that maybe, you know, we've just got to stick with a Bible study, you know. But I know certainly certainly for myself, we don't do well in just sitting down and chatting. I mean, we're doing all right, but we're not the best at doing that. And I've always found some of the best ways to get guys to open up is to just go for a walk, maybe even get a fire pit out and have something where there is a focus. You are focused on doing something, and then suddenly things start to flow, and it just makes it so much easier. So maybe that an encouragement that, you know, because we're saying, isn't it, that you know, how can we cross those barriers? You know, if you're young and you need a male mentor, seek someone out, ask them to go out for a walk, ask them to go out for a drink down the pub. You know, it's breaking those barriers. And if you are an older person, even if you're much older, like Nigel, or much younger, like myself, no, I'm just kidding. What if you're older and you have kids, you're married? Actually, don't think that you can settle, I think, in your own little bit where you're just happily looking after your family, or just a little bit that you serve at church. You know, actually think, what can I do to engage with those that are younger than me, and also those that are older. The emphasis is on you to take responsibility, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? Men, we are there to take responsibility and to step up and to cross that divide, and maybe that's the challenge to all of us, really.
I think isn't it respecting that the different generation, whether it's a generation younger or older, that actually there's value there. And as an older person is thinking, I have value to give. As a younger person thinking, well, they have value to give to me and receive. But it can be two ways. You were saying earlier, it can be two way. We can grow, and I think it's seeking that out, isn't it? It's I mean, in fact, I've got one young guy who's like, he's the age of my younger nephew who's just finished university, but yet he's such an incredibly wonderful Christian young man who is sort of re-inspiring me, because I don't know, the older you get, you kind of lose the momentum a little bit. You just kind of settle into that, you know, like Paul says, the race. I don't know. I have. But it's actually sometimes the younger people just reignite that spark. They kind of help you in pushing forward, instead of just making it about, I'm just going to impart everything I know to you. But actually, there's so much you can
learn from.
Yeah.
Definitely, like the zeal and just the ways about which we sort of invest. And I think, Ian, that point about discipleship is, just something that is, to say, go out into all the world and make converts. No, we make disciples. And I think that that's so important to understand in any context, whether that be sort of with guys, just church, just friends, like the ways in which we conduct ourselves, the ways in which we share the word, is just important, that there's like that relational aspect behind it, that we actually show a care to what we do. And I think that that's really important. And that's like from the examples of the guys that you're saying, like the leaders and stuff in your lives that have come along and sort of gone, look, come for breakfast, come for food, or whether it just be the trades kind of thing, there's a genuine kind of aspiration to care for that person in their life at that time. And so I think we've talked about the specifics there as to leadership and people that inspired you. What about now? We're going to move on to books of the Bible. There's already been debates over how many we can include here, but how many sort of so as a whole, Precept UK is an organisation that strives to help people to know God deeply through His Word, so they can live differently. And that's definitely what we sort of touched on in that previous point. That is one thing to know, like Nigel said, and another thing to apply. So that's a huge part of what we do as a ministry. But with that in mind, what's one specific book of the Bible that shaped your Christian walk the most, and why? I can see Nigel's got a face going. Is there anyone else that wants to?
It's a difficult one because there are so many, and I can't whittle it down to less than 3, I'm afraid. But if I had to go to one, it would probably be John's Gospel. It would probably be John's Gospel, really. It was one of the earliest books that I studied with Precept. We did a study called God, Are You There? Do you know? Do you care? It was a brilliant book. It had a great introduction to the actual study of John's Gospel, explaining how the Bible came about, the Old Testament, New Testament, all that stuff. But for me, John's Gospel introduces you to the person of Jesus in a very, very clear way. And, all the I am statements that Jesus makes, I'm the bread of life, the light of the world, the door, the shepherd, the resurrection and the life, the way, the truth and the life, the true vine. And at the end of the book, in John chapter 20, John says why he wrote the book. Many other signs I could have included in here. But these have been written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in His name. And so I think for me it's got to be John's Gospel, really. Ephesians has been very important to me. Who we are in Christ, and then how we are to walk in light of who we are in Christ has been very important. And Nehemiah, more recently Nehemiah in the Old Testament, what an incredible leader. Seeing the state of a city and a people that were on God's heart, Jerusalem, the Jewish people. He's 900 miles away, but he hears about the state of the city and the state of the people. And he's just devastated when he hears that. And after 4 months of prayer, he's given an opportunity to go back, and he rebuilds the walls of Jerusalem in 52 days, getting a community of people together. None of them expert builders, but behind a vision to build the city. And for me, that is so inspiring. And we look at our nation today, our spiritual walls are down. And we need Nehemiahs out there that says, right, we're going to do something about this. You look at our heritage as a nation, sending missionaries all around the world, and the impact that that's had. We've got other countries now sending missionaries back to our country. And actually, we need Nehemiahs who are strong and tough and know what God is calling them to. But it started with a heart that was in tune with God's heart, which was a place and a people. And when he heard about the state of the place and the people, it had an impact on his life. And that's challenging for us, because when we look at the state of our country and our people, does that cut us to the quick? And if it doesn't, then let's pray that God would give us his heart on these matters, and then we can then move in a direction to do something about it. So I'm sorry about that. It was John, the Ephesians, and then
Couple more Exodus, Leviticus, just carry on. No, it's good. What about yourself, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to, well, maybe I will do a Nigel on it, but I wasn't going to do Nigel on that, but I found it hard to come up with an answer for this. But the first book of the Bible that had the biggest impact on me was Romans. And that's because when I became a Christian, I came out of a church tradition that had lots of gospel stories read every week, and so in a sense I was familiar with the gospel stories. And so when I became a Christian, I was told, read the Bible, and I had just this small little Bible. In fact, I think it was just the Gospels initially, and I remember reading it, but because I knew it somehow or other, it didn't inspire me. I know this. I didn't inspire me until I fully got a full Bible, and someone said, went to Romans, and I started with that. Not read anything like this before. I've not heard this being read out in church before, and that just gripped me. And so that was my first time to passionately engage with the Word of God, was reading the book of Romans. I'm not going to pretend I understood it, but I enjoyed engaging with it as a young man. And then probably the first formal book, that was just reading and studying on my own, but then the first formal study I ever did with a book was the book of Acts. So I loved going through the book of Acts and just hearing how they just lived out, the early church, and how they lived out faith, what it actually looked like and what they did. So that was, I've always enjoyed going through there. But then just to do a full Nigel on it, the third book, Ephesians. I'm always quoting and coming out with Ephesians. There's just so much that I love that's relevant in Ephesians. And we've done it in the men's study recently, haven't we? So, Ephesians would have been the third one. But yeah, that's kind of how it's progressed as a journey through. But
that's a head up. I mean, I know a lot of people, I've heard in the past, sort of a pastor sort of say, when he was able to sort of bring someone to faith, I just don't want them to discover the book of Leviticus first, because it's just like, but Romans is a whole other ball game of like the thickness and depth. But again, it's I think that there's definitely comes a simplicity that Paul is able to have a real skill of unpacking something that's really complicated and making it really simple to the people of the time and to us as well now, to be able to look back and see assurances and see the ways in which Christ is the completion and things like that. So yeah, just an incredible selection there. What about yourself, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think following on from our last session, I can easily say the book of Daniel for the same reasons. You'll have to go back and watch the last session if you haven't watched it.
I like it.
Just because a man of integrity showing us how to walk in an ungodly world. Brilliant. Great.
Yeah. So relevant for today too, still, isn't it?
Completely and utterly relevant. Yeah. And then the other one, I'm not going to do a full Nigel and do three, but I will do
doing a Nigel has become a verb.
And I'm going to say the same as you, actually. I kind of, when you said Romans, I was like, he said mine. But it's okay, we can both have the same.
You can.
I love Romans because, as you say, it's just so full of instructions of how to be and just who God is and how we relate to Him. I think actually, wasn't it when they were putting the Bible together and choosing the books to go in, you might be able to tell me if I'm wrong, but they put Romans straight after Acts, not because it's chronological, but because it was so packed and they wanted to get that in there straight after Acts. I don't know whether that is truly the case. Maybe I might have misheard that. But I love it because it's great, because it, for me, I mean, like some of the key verses, Romans 12, 1 and 2 of, just that, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Work out what that will of God is. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Fantastic to kind of to dwell on that and to focus and to walk in that. And then there was also this one lovely little verse. I think it's Romans 1:8. Potentially, I might have got that wrong, but it is that creation is eagerly anticipating the revealing of the sons of God. I absolutely love that, and it's such a jam-packed verse because it's the world is waiting for us. We are the sons of God, the ones that God has called to be a part of our family, a part of His family, and we are there to represent Him, not just as His servants, not even just as his ambassadors of his kingdom, but his sons. That a son doesn't just represent, he carries the heart of the Father, and that for me is just like fantastic. So for me, for when I'm doing like weddings and things like that, I'm constantly thinking, right, forget about the shots that I need to get. I know I'll get those, but actually when I go to a wedding, what am I doing there? How am I presenting myself? I kind of consider it of reasoning it from, I am a son who is there to share my Father's heart, to value the people around them, to make sure that they are able to enjoy and get the most out of things. And then the photos come after that, just a bonus. But yeah, Romans, great book.
Perfect. I feel like if I don't include Ephesians at this point, this game over. But I think for myself, a slightly different sort of approach. For me, I think Proverbs just really spoke to me. It's because I take on a lot when I'm reading, and I'm just all in the zone. But as for memory and memory verses, I can remember films and things I watch, but it just seems to be something different when it comes to memory verses. So I struggle in that sense to sort of, I know and to be daily in the Word and to be able to like know that application comes from being there and applying that to the day ahead. But for Proverbs, for me, is being able to remember like wisdom in small times, and just like small verses, and just being like, oh, okay, I can like bring that to mind. I'm always challenged and like found it impressive that when Solomon asked for wisdom, that the Lord found value in that as well, and granted him, was pleased by that and granted him the success that he did within his kingship. And so, yeah, for me, standout verse, Proverbs 27:19. I don't want to butcher this. Nigel's going to double check me. I think it's as in water, face reflects face, so too the heart of a man reflects a man. And I think that just remembering things like that in times where you're just kind of up against how you come across, whether or not it's genuine or not, it doesn't matter if you think that you're putting across something, if it's not within your heart to like be led to do it, in the ways that Christ is that much of a transformation in your life, then it kind of doesn't seem genuine. And so it's not as if it won't be seen or come across that way. And so we need to be able to be someone that has that desire to want to be there. And then on the flip side of that, Ecclesiastes as well. I think that was a really good one to just understand that there's nothing outside of God, that there is the desire, which is kind of a bit of a downer. I think a lot of the time people can read that, some funny ones and some funny verses in there. I think there's bread is made for laughter, wine gladdens life, and money is the answer to everything. Just a really random verse that you can take out of context completely. But yeah, and then finally James, just because
we've gone way beyond one here.
Yeah.
Before.
You told us one. You'll get four.
I saw the starting lineup, and then I thought, we've got a few people out here adding to this. So yeah, so I'd say I'd put Proverbs and Ecclesiastes in that poetic part anyway, and then say as for kind of the practical outworking, I think James is just straight down the line. Here's some things that you can do. Here's the ways about which you can do it. And I think he speaks it as it is, and just some real kind of practical applications there as well.
Yeah.
Very good. Interesting you talk about Proverbs. You said Proverbs 27:19, which you got absolutely on the nail, of course. But Proverbs 27:17 is iron sharpens iron as one man sharpens another.
Perfect.
And a lot of men's groups are called Iron Sharpens Iron, aren't they? And we have a men's group called Iron Sharpens Iron.
Indeed.
But also Proverbs 5:21, talking about guys and guys' issues and stuff like that, is a real key verse for me. The ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord. He, God, watches all his paths. So Proverbs 5:21 for me is a really key verse. The ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord. He watches all his paths. And that is both an encouragement, but also a challenge.
Amen to that. Well, guys, I think that wraps up the video there. Thank you so much for coming out for this two-parter.
Pleasure.
We haven't had you over the 2 weeks. It has been back to back, but you've given across a lot of your time, and we're really appreciative of that. Yeah, we will put in links to the stuff mentioned, studies that are relevant as well to what we're talking about. And yeah, just as a final exhortation, I think we can all agree that there are ways in which we can really be valuable to other brothers. And yeah, a lot covered. Share, subscribe if you're new. We release a lot of content on the channel, ranging from inductive Bible study, tips and tricks as to getting the most out of your word, and then also sort of more in-depth kind of looks at specific methods that we use within the Precept study methods. So if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and we'll know to sort of do more content like this. But until next time, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.